Yesterday, from Romans 13, we talked about Paul's admonition that we love one another. And today in chapter 14, especially between verses 10 to 13, he talks about the importance of not judging another, which is something Jesus spoke about in the Sermon on the Mount. And whenever we talk about not judging other people, there's a couple different sides that people will say to me. On the one hand, people will say, well, I have to use my judgment. And Paul and Jesus aren't saying we shouldn't use wisdom and discernment to make good or wise decisions. We are to use judgment in that way. But when he says, why do you pass judgment on your brother or sister? Or why do you despise your brother or sister? You hear a connection between judgment and a negative emotion, a negative feeling, a negative initial reaction to someone who is different. And that's the type of judgment that I think Paul is referring to, where you judge someone just because they look differently than you do, or they have a different color skin, or they dress differently than you do, or they have different habits or choices that they make. And Paul reminds the Romans in verse 12 then, so then each of us will be accountable to God. We're all going to stand before the judgment seat of God. And we have to be accountable to God, so we should focus on our own life, our own self, and not be making judgments negatively about other people. And then he says in verse 13, let us therefore no longer pass judgment on one another, but resolve instead never to put a stumbling block or a hindrance in the way of another. And when we judge another person, we are putting a stumbling block in their way. If we are making assumptions about somebody before we've even spoken to them or met them, we are making things more difficult for them. One of the things about our son Nathan being involved in music is I can remember at different times going to concerts that he was a part of, and afterwards you would see people ducking out of a building, and it might be some young skinny kid with a black hoodie sweatshirt, and you can make a judgment about that individual, like, who is that punk kid? And not know that that punk kid in your eyes is a phenomenally talented musician whose ability with a musical instrument is better than any ability you have, right? We don't want to be foolish in making judgments about other people that become a hindrance to relationship, a stumbling block to connection, or to somebody being successful. Love one another, Paul says in chapter 13. And part of loving our neighbors is not judging them.